minerals are spark plugs for the body. So if we lack minerals, we lack that life force energy in our cells. And then we see everything else start to break down from there, which is why it's such a great thing to look at initially, because we could chase progesterone itself for a long time. But if we're just mineral deficient, we can't make it ourselves. We don't have the resources. Stress uses minerals. So if we pair stress with a food supply that's low in minerals, we create a population that's deficient, and oftentimes we need some supplements to dig ourselves out of that.
Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. My name is Mimi, and I am sitting next to my wonderful, glorious partner in life and love and podcasting.
What is going on, everybody? This is Chase. We have such an awesome learning opportunity today. We have an incredible guest, an expert in wellness, specifically, women's health and women's hormones. And we just went through a really, really awesome mineral test with her. And I'm still just unraveling and learning all the ins and outs of it. But really, really excited to welcome Kaely McDevitt to the Medicine Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm honestly so excited for this conversation, but also I'm just excited that I can now call you like friend and someone that I trust and can also point people to, because we've had the opportunity to work with you a little bit, and I'm just like blown away by how much information you shared with us and how much it's helped. I mean, honestly, we had our session with you last week, and the recommendations that you gave me, I feel just in a week, I feel so much better. My head is clearing up, like the brain fog I can feel like slowly floating away, and my digestion is so much better. My poops have been on point.
Yes.
And so I can already feel like just in a week. And so I'm grateful to you, and also just using my little bit of testimonial here for all the listeners. Like, Kaely knows her shit, you guys. So listen up, take notes. And I'm excited to jump right in. Are you ready? All right. Okay. So you're a registered dietitian.
Yep.
Awesome. But you describe yourself as a women's health dietitian, which I love. You also say, I pulled this from your Instagram. You also say that, quote, "The result of my undergrad, internship, and master's degree was a credential behind my name, a great understanding of biochemistry and human physiology, and a very distorted relationship with food and exercise," end quote. So please explain what was going on here. You wouldn't necessarily expect that from a registered dietitian. So I want to give you a couple minutes here to dive into your story and tell us like why this is so important to you and what experience you have had in your own life.
Sure. Yeah. So I had no intention of being in the women's health space. I actually didn't even know that was a potential route that I could go. I went into dietetics thinking I'd work in sports nutrition because I grew up being an athlete. I had like a marathon running stint in my life, which feels crazy to even think about now. But I was also really type A, really perfectionist. And I was the type of person that was like, if you give me a list of things to follow, I'm going to do those perfectly. And so we were learning about nutrition in school. And I mean, you guys know how long it takes new information to make it into education and practice. So this was primarily like the food plate and food pyramid guide and just really like conventional and outdated nutrition information. But I was executing this like to a T. It was a lot of calorie counting and low fat, and like Special K had a big moment during this time that I was in school.
Yeah.
Weird times with Special K. And so I finished all these years of school. I think it was like 7 in total between like the internship and master's after undergrad. And I felt horrible. I had a lot of hormone health issues going on. I was on birth control and had been for quite some time, and just really didn't feel like myself at least half the month. I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of gut health issues. And I just, I felt like a huge hypocrite at the end of all this schooling. I'm like, great, now I'm credentialed to help people and I'm doing the things I'm learning, and I feel worse. And so I did a lot of digging into like the menstrual cycle and birth control and hormones, because this wasn't really a part of our curriculum. And realized that applying generic nutrition information to women was actually hurting them, and that most of our nutrition research until somewhat recently was only done on men. And so I just spent like all of my free time trying to learn this and, took myself off birth control, inched my way back to feeling like me. And by the time I did get there, I realized that there were a lot of other women in my life that were looking for that info because they too were doing all the right things and not feeling good or not looking the way that they wanted to. And so I started it as a blog that I think like just my mom and some of my friends from home were reading because I just needed an outlet for this information that totally rocked my world. And then it pivoted into a private practice about 7 years ago and have been in women's health ever since.
And how do you feel now?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel great now. And I think my hormone health journey was longer than it needed to be because there was a lot I didn't know at that time. And I hinted to that like perfectionist type A personality type. And that's really not conducive for healing, especially for women, because there's so much with like the stress and mineral depletion piece of that. And I had a lot of unlearning to do about nutrition and my relationship to my body and exercise. So I created a lot of drama for myself on that healing journey. It took longer than it takes our clients, thankfully. But ever since then, I've really felt great. Really just feeling awesome.
That's great.
What are, I would assume mostly women, coming to you with symptoms of? What is their primary area of interest or concern? And generally, what are the big themes that you tend to see?
Sure. Yeah. So we serve like reproductive age women primarily. So generally like 20s to mid 40s is kind of our typical client. And they come to us with either miserable periods. So they're like half the month, I feel like a totally different person. I'm missing out on life, or they're really irregular. They might come to us for fertility support, whether they've been dealing with infertility or they just want to be proactive. And then kind of married in all of the hormone health stuff is a lot of like underactive thyroid, gut issues, just like low energy, brain fog, those types of symptoms. So we cast a bit of a wide net being kind of like general women's health, but that's typically what people come to us for.
Yeah, that's great. And, your story makes me think of our stories are similar, but not identical, of course. I was trained as a dental hygienist, and it's so funny because like made it to the top of my class, getting all these like special awards and, just like dialed in like the biggest tooth nerd out there. And then I get out of school and into practice and you learn so much more. And then getting out of clinical practice and into the podcasting health and wellness space, learning from people, reading new books, just more aware of like holistic health in general. I've learned so much about the teeth that directly is in contradiction to what I learned in school. And I'm actually grateful for this because it gives me a sense of empathy for people who, were like me and like you, wanting to go into healthcare to help people because you're interested and you're on fire, you want to help people, and you're taught a certain, script of things to tell others, and you learn some good information, yes, but also some really harmful information. And, in all of our frustration about, mainstream medicine and conventional medicine and all of this, like it does allow me to dip back into my empathy because like I was her. I was that person. And I'm sure you feel the same too, where, okay, once we know better, we can do better. But like there are so many people in the medical system, nurses, doctors, dietitians, physical therapists that are just doing what they were taught. And we were them. And so it does, I'm curious to hear your thoughts here, but it does allow for some empathy there.
Oh yeah, 1,000% agree with that. I'm thankful for the experience on both sides, the conventional schooling and the awakening that happens when you learn things outside of it. And I'm glad for the hormone struggles that I went through because I would have never found my way to this kind of work without it. So yeah, I think it all served its purpose. I'm not mad.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's get into it. When you and I were talking, a few months back when we were planning out this conversation and everything, our intention was really like a deep dive into women's hormone health, which we're definitely going to talk about hormones, but as we were preparing for this episode and I was getting, questions ready and digging into your information and your Instagram, which, by the way, you guys, follow Kaely on Instagram ASAP right now. It's at Kaely RD, KaelyRD. Her Instagram is so good. It's amazing. I was just like binging it yesterday. It's so good. It's every single woman of reproductive age should be following you, in my opinion. So little side note there, but I really felt the nudge as I was moving through your information and just like in my own health journey to focus more in this conversation on progesterone specifically. We can talk about the other hormones a little bit here and there, but I'm really getting the sense from my own life, from my own labs, and in talking to you, and then deep diving on your information, that progesterone, like women lacking optimal levels of progesterone is a huge problem. It's a theme that is coming up in the work that you do. And this is another quote pulled from your Instagram. You say that, quote, "We are a generation deprived of progesterone." You also say, "We typically hear estrogen as the female hormone, but I'd argue that it's progesterone that really lets us access the good stuff," end quote. So I want to unpack that. First, let's start with, what is progesterone?
Yeah, I love progesterone. We could talk about this for like 4 hours today, but progesterone is one of our sex hormones. And the name comes from progestation. So we think of it typically with pregnancy because this is the hormone that will carry and support a pregnancy. And it balances the effects of estrogen. So when you asked why people might come to see us with various cycle symptoms or infertility, like 99.9% of those symptoms come from progesterone and estrogen being out of balance. Estrogen is more proliferative, so it's building tissue up. Progesterone keeps checks and balances on that. And progesterone is like a calming, soothing, like grounding, in touch with life and flow with life kind of hormone. And if you think about, which the sad thing is there typically aren't a lot of examples of this in our life, but if you think about the women that you know that like are at home in their body and they step into the room and you're like, damn, she feels good and she's glowing and like she's not urgent, she's not rushing through life, she's not stressed, she's moving on her own timeline. Like that is progesterone. That is like that mother energy. And I think generationally, we just don't see a lot of it. There's so many hormone health symptoms that women are dealing with, infertility, just like the anxiety and the stress and the poor sleep and just all of that we see with kind of being a modern human right now are in opposition of progesterone. So the progesterone issues are definitely rampant, and a big part of how we feel our best and optimize fertility is getting that back.
In this little cup, I have my favorite way to enjoy mushy love, which is in combination with cold milk. We drink raw cow's milk, and I put it about 8 ounces of milk in with about a scoop and a half of mushy love. That combination, like the cold version of mushy love, tastes like liquid graham crackers. Like, I shit you not. And if you don't know yet what mushy love is, it's our mushroom elixir with 500 milligrams of chaga, which is amazing for gut support. They call it the king of mushrooms. And then 500 milligrams as well of tremella mushroom, which is the beauty mushroom. And she is most known for holding 500 times her weight in water. The more hydrated we are, the more plump and dewy and fresh and young our skin looks.
Plump and dewy.
For Mushy Love, go to getmushylove.com and you can use the code MEDICINE for a nice little discount that we only give to our medicine podcast listeners. Love that. This is stuff that you just don't learn in like high school, even college stuff. Like we don't deep dive until there's a problem usually. And I'm so grateful that we can, gift this information to us, but also our listeners. And this is something that I hear over and over and over from the other women's health experts that I follow, like how important progesterone is. But it's just, I think the hormone conversation in general can be really confusing and almost like overwhelming for people. Like, where do I start? How
Mhm.
do I know what's off, what's in balance? And I think it can just be this like overwhelming tidal wave of information to the point where people just like, I give up kind of thing. So piggybacking on that, you mentioned a little bit about progesterone, what it is. Why is it specifically so important for us as women to optimize this in our bodies?
Yeah. So, and a really important fact about progesterone is that it's only made if we ovulate. And we'll come back to the reasons why I think we struggle to make it. But, anyways, this is only happening if ovulation occurs, which means we really only have the second half of the cycle with progesterone on board. So, if there's anything in the way of ovulation, we now lose progesterone. And so, like I mentioned, it's balancing estrogen. So, it's setting you up for a period that's not miserable. So, something that kind of comes and goes without majorly wrecking the way that we move through our life. It's supporting our sleep and stress in the second half of the cycle. And it's very supportive for thyroid function too. So the thyroid and progesterone have a bidirectional relationship. It's actually why your temperatures are higher in the second half of the cycle, is because progesterone is speeding up metabolism. And then if you desire pregnancy now or in the future, we must have progesterone to carry a pregnancy. And a lot of early miscarriages happen because we don't get robust enough progesterone early on. So there aren't really any avenues of the body that don't get impacted by our sex hormones, from our brain, sleep, metabolism, and fertility. But progesterone is a big one for avoiding those symptoms.
So you said, did you have something?
Well, I was going to say, does one come to this state of progesterone deficiency through, interventions like birth control, through, surpluses or deficits in nutrients, macros and micronutrients and things of that nature?
Yeah, you just hit a couple big ones. So birth control is something that I could rant about for a long time.
Girl, rant.
Yeah. So it's a big part of my personal story too. But when you are on hormonal birth control, it works by suppressing ovulation, which means we lose progesterone production. So it's like chemically shutting off that capacity. And depending on the type of hormonal birth control you use, they often provide progestins, which is a synthetic form of progesterone that has very different action on the body. So if you are on hormonal birth control, we are not benefiting from natural progesterone. And it can take some time to get that brain ovary communication back again post birth control. It was, part of why my journey was such a long one. So birth control is a big part of why we see a lot of progesterone issues now. The other part of this factor is, the human body, particularly the female body, is always filtering decisions about ovulation and hormones through the question, am I safe? Do I have resources? Do I have abundant energy? Because if the answer is no to those questions, ovulation isn't essential for us to live. We can turn that off. We can save resources. We certainly wouldn't want to set somebody up for conception if they don't have energy around to provide for another life. So things like under eating, depriving specific macronutrients, missing key micronutrients, all of those could contribute to that I'm not safe signal in the brain. And then ovulation is either less frequent or shut off. And then we don't divert energy to progesterone because it's, these hormones are like icing on the cake. We don't need them to survive, but we do need them to thrive. And if we have any lack of energy, we're going to shut that down.
What is the mainstream approach? Say someone goes into their just like family prac doc, or maybe they're working with an endocrinologist or something along those lines, and they're like, hey, I have a progesterone deficiency. What are they likely to hear in the mainstream?
Yeah, so they're likely to say either maybe that's not a thing, or we don't have a way. Yeah, no, you're wrong. We don't have a way to test that. Or if you're coming for any of the symptoms related to progesterone deficiency, like miserable or irregular cycles, as an example, birth control is typically the first option. It was for me. So if I look back in high school when I first went on birth control, I was having miserable periods and like missing days of school. And all of that is a low progesterone, high estrogen state. And so birth control was presented as here's a way out of that misery. And me as like a high school student was like, yep, right. Easy. And the ironic thing about that is it's now completely shutting off progesterone production. And though you may see some symptom relief, which I certainly did, it's not fixing the underlying issue. And that's to be dealt with years later whenever you do come off.
It sounds like it's kind of like giving a type 2 diabetic insulin.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a quick, here, take this, inject this, whatever, and let's not look at, or let's not address what's actually causing it. Rather, like, let's just turn that signal off.
Yeah, no, it's the default resources that are available are like it's like HRT, it's like hormone replacement therapies. Men is the same way. I mean, I was 27 years old with low testosterone, and they were like, "Let's get you on hormone replacement therapy." And I even at the time it didn't feel right, and I knew nothing. I just was like, "Really? That's the first option?" Are there some upstream potential solutions here, which of course we'll even get into today as it pertains to minerals and things of that nature? But yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. So how would you, in your practice respond to this around, progesterone deficiency and what sort of order of operations are you taking as it pertains to, adjustments that would be supportive?
Yeah, so we really want to start with creating that safety in the body. So we would do kind of an audit of how we're living, moving, thinking, operating, and seeing what things are within our control. So being in the nutrition space, we of course start there. We're making sure that there isn't glaring deficiencies in their diet in terms of like total calories or macronutrients and micronutrients, because there are some specific ones that are involved in progesterone production that we can totally get into. We'll look at things like sleep and circadian rhythm, because that's a really overlooked cause of stress and lack of safety on the body. So like really getting some good sunlight in the morning, blue light blocking at night. We'll look at their stress management toolkit. Is this a busy entrepreneur, which is a common type of client we serve? And I know when we've chatted before, we can relate to this. Mm-hmm. Is this a mom of multiple kids or a newly postpartum mom, just somebody with a lot of stress in their life? And what can we do to help buffer those stress inputs? Do we need to audit the volume and intensity of their training? Is this a female that's maybe putting too much energy into the exercise piece and not resting, recovering, or nourishing enough? And then even the like thoughts and beliefs aspect of this is big too. What you believe to be true about your health and ability to succeed is what is going to happen. So we're big on like, what are we marinating this brain in all day, and how can we start to rewire some of that?
So is that why you think, why you say we are a generation deprived? When I hear that statement, we are a generation deprived, I think of the cornucopia of diet culture trends that still happen today. But certainly when you and I were teenagers, it was like skinny. You want to be as skinny as possible, basically. Now it's more like, I think it's changed where now it's like a big butt and curviness is like in now. It's like as they change every 10 years or something. So diet culture trends, the low fat trend. I think also obviously birth control, more and more people are learning about birth control and the negative effects on the body. But I think when we were teenagers, that was just normal, and moms were doing their best too. And they didn't have podcasts to listen to learn from for free, really trusting their doctors. Now there's a less trust in the mainstream medical system, I think. Why else would we be a generation deprived, in your opinion?
Yeah, those two, the like nourishment and the birth control, are biggies. But the other two I would add to that list are just like a mismatch between the way modern humans live and our biology. Again, particularly for women, but men are subject to this too. It's like everything is urgent, and it has to be done now, and it has to be done better than everyone around you. And we have to be up on what's happening everywhere in the world in an instant on our phone. And we're living essentially in captivity, like inside in front of screens all the time, and really disconnected from nature and sunlight. So all of those things contribute to that stress burden on the body, and stress is going to steal resources from progesterone production. And then the other piece that I would add to that is just a lack of body literacy. I don't know if this has improved, but my middle school health class was like, periods are going to be miserable. You can get pregnant at any moment. And that's it. Yeah. And so there's no learning about the cycle and like what is normal and what isn't. And if we have symptoms, is that a problem, or is that just a signal from the body to look at something else?
Yeah.
We went to Christian school and we didn't have health class.
Nothing.
There was no sex ed. They just want you to think that sex doesn't even exist.
Sex is bad. That's it. Please sign this line that says you'll be a virgin till you're married. And it was just completely unbelievable. And as I probably will showcase today, I still don't know certain basics when it comes to wellness. I have people to blame for that. But nonetheless, speaking of which, this could be complete bro science in my, many efforts to solve insomnia for myself. There are some who advocate for progesterone use for men as it pertains to, dealing with stress or an overactive nervous system and things like, sleeping issues or insomnia. Is that completely crazy?
No, it isn't. Progesterone is made by men too. It's just in smaller quantities than in women, but it's a really interesting hormone. It's also a neurosteroid. So the brain makes progesterone too in both sexes. And you see it actually increase with traumatic brain injury because it helps heal the brain. But it acts on GABA receptors in the brain, which is why it's calming, relaxing, and might help with sleep. And I'm not an expert in men's health, but I would imagine all the things that sabotage progesterone production in women would do that in men too. So it's just that same picture of like too much stress, too little nourishment, and some deficiencies.
So aside from some of the symptoms and the manifestations that you've talked about, really heavy, painful, debilitating periods, sounds like it's an indicator that progesterone is probably not optimal. What are some other manifestations that someone might have come up that might lead to or have them, come to the conclusion that they need to take a look at this? And also, is that sufficient, or do you recommend, people go and get like a full Dutch test or other test?
Yeah. So irregular cycles would be another clue. Like if we're not ovulating consistently, we know that progesterone's not on board consistently. If you happen to track basal body temperature for like fertility awareness method, if you notice that you don't have higher luteal phase temps, you're never getting into those 98s, that would be another great clue that progesterone is not optimal. And I love basal body temperature tracking because it's like free real-time data that you get. You can't test your hormones every day, but you can look at your temps. Thyroid issues would be a clue that there's some progesterone need, anxiety, sleep issues, even digestive issues too, like irregularity. It could be more on the bloating and constipated side, could be more on the loose stool side. Any fertility struggles would be a clue for some progesterone issues. And then even like the histamine and allergy side of things could be a clue here too, because estrogen and histamine are besties. So where we don't have that action of progesterone, we're more likely to deal with histamine stuff, whether that's allergies or skin issues or like flushing after meals. There's a whole world to that histamine piece, but those would be all things that I'd be looking at for clues that we need some progesterone. And then as for testing, this is part of why we added some mineral discussion to our conversations. But in early practice, I was running like full Dutch tests on everybody. And I think it's an awesome test. I mean, you get so much information and like you get personally called out by the results and really motivated to make changes. But we actually don't start there very often with our clients because the hormones themselves are very much like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot south of that we need to look at first, minerals being one of them, and then just all of those foundational habits. So we don't automatically jump to testing progesterone, even with those symptoms. We would actually be looking at some of the building blocks for progesterone first and working our way up, and then using direct progesterone testing just if we really need it, or if they've already done all the building block stuff and we're still wondering what's up.
Okay, yeah, because those Dutch tests, they do tell you a lot, but they are expensive AF.
Yes. Yeah.
Having done a couple of them myself, I'm like, ah! And I get a good deal because I have so many like practitioner friends. But yeah, it's definitely more one of the more expensive ones. But you're saying that you can just test for progesterone individually, right?
Yep, you can. You can do blood work for progesterone, and there's even some like home urine test kits for progesterone too. Yeah, I love Dutch tests just like you, but they're expensive.
Yeah,
they're kind of a pain to collect too.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that. Yeah. Okay. So before we move on to like a little bit deeper into what does it mean? What does it look like for the woman who's optimizing progesterone and how do we get there? Is there anything else that you want to say about hormones and maybe the relationship between progesterone and the other hormones, or other hormonal themes that you're seeing in your practice that you think would be beneficial for our listeners to bring up?
Yeah. So the other main thing, like the low progesterone thing, is pretty consistent for the clients that we serve, but it also tends to run with the like high stress hormone persona, burning the candle at both ends, like just feeling high strung, difficulty winding down at the end of the day, usually like zero sex drive because the body's like, we can't even entertain that idea. We're barely getting through this. So that would be another thing that I think is relevant in this conversation. Even if progesterone isn't on the radar, if you're resonating with that, like living on stress hormones personality type, like always feeling rushed, usually forgetting meals, maybe you have salty or sweet cravings, potentially there's no appetite. It really depends on where we are in that stress sequence, poor sleep, low sex drive, maybe even midsection weight gain that doesn't make sense based on the exercise or nutrition, and then loss of lean muscle mass. Those would be other things that would clue you into some stress hormone issues. And where there are stress hormone issues, there are progesterone issues, just with the whole cascade of that in the body. So really everything we're talking about today is applicable in that case too. And that's another big kind of percentage of the clients that we serve.
So that would show up as like, if you were doing tests, or it would be like a high cortisol scenario.
Yep. High cortisol. And then if that's done long-term, then eventually very low cortisol.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Just dysregulated. Okay. So let's talk about, you mentioned the safety piece. Of course, starting there is so important, just looking at lifestyle, but what are some other big rocks that people can look at and adjust or audit? You use that term a lot, I notice, in your Instagram post, which I think is perfect. You're not saying do this or do that. You're saying just think about it. Just like audit how much you're exercising, or how much, if you're under eating or dieting too much, just audit that. I think is a perfect term. So what are some of these big rocks other than feeling safe, like you talked about?
Yeah, so the food piece is an easy starting point. And I think the reason why audit works so well, and you guys know this because you're in the health space too, the same advice does not fit for all people. It's kind of the most frustrating thing and also the coolest thing about this space. And it actually won't always be appropriate in all seasons. So what is progesterone supportive for me now might not be later, and vice versa. But I would be looking at, do I have representation from all three macronutrients, so carbs, proteins, and fats? Or am I still kind of bought into some of the either fat fearing or carb fearing messaging that we've had over the last few decades? Am I eating breakfast within an hour of waking so I can get my cortisol production under control in the morning?
But what about fasted cardio, Kaely? Like, what am I going to do without my fasted cardio?
Most fat when you're fasting.
She says with the most sarcasm ever.
Gosh, I've been there too. Look, we lived through the same decades. So there's been some really bizarre advice here. And the hard thing with that is a lot of times when somebody has first started doing like fasted cardio, for example, it feels good initially.
Feels great.
It feels good because we're getting all that cortisol in the morning and we're like, man, I feel alive.
Cortisol is so powerful.
Right.
It is, especially if you resonate with the type A, like overachiever. We love cortisol in our system. We will do whatever we can to keep it there.
Even if there's nothing to be had, my brain will make something up,
Right? You'll just be like stressing about something random just to get that threshold met. But I'm not a fan of fasted cardio or really extended fasting for women long term. Fasting's interesting. There are some real benefits to that used therapeutically. I just think where women get into trouble with it is when they adopt that as like an everyday forever type of a practice. Because if we think about what we're doing when we withhold food, we are signaling to the body that there isn't as much around, or that it only happens in certain windows. And if our goal is progesterone, and especially if our goal is conception, we just want gentle nutrition. We want to know that it's coming in consistently. We don't have strict timing or rules around it. And we find our clients do best if they have that breakfast within an hour of waking. And that can be a huge change if you've been doing some intermittent fasting or fasted workouts for years. And
I think a lot of, sorry to interrupt here. I think that I want to tug on that thread a little bit, because There's so many women, and I was here too because I had gone, I'm like embarrassed to say this to you, but I went like a year intermittent fasting because I heard on Ben Greenfield podcast, he had a fasting expert on. I'm not thinking in my 27-year-old brain, female brain,
Mhm.
these are both 35-year-old men.
Yeah.
This is not the same as me. But I hear, like cognition and more energy and obviously losing fat and things like that. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah. So I went a year intermittent fasting, not eating till lunch, which was 1 p.m. at my dental hygiene job.
Mm.
And it took me going through some fainting spells
Mm.
to really realize like maybe I should stop. So, but all that to say, when I did, okay, I'm going to get into, I'm going to eat more, I'm going to nourish myself more. I wasn't even hungry in the morning because my body had just known this very strict window. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like there might be a woman listening who's like, I'm not hungry till 11 a.m. every day.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
I'm glad you brought that up because that is a big part of that kind of transitioning from that mindset to more of a nourishment. Your body adapts to what we do, meaning if we are withholding food to a certain time, we've ignored hunger cues for enough time that they start to quiet down. And then our metabolism adjusts to undereating too. So actually, a metabolic rate tends to go down if we've been under fueling for a while. So we actually don't feel hungry. And it can take some time and some practice to build the metabolism back up and to get in touch with those hunger and fullness cues. Because again, we all grew up through decades where the messaging around nutrition was like, ignore and suppress hunger at all costs, really, to follow these rules. And, the body eventually gave up on trying to tell us. So if you're waking up and you're not hungry yet, that's good feedback. We know we've got some metabolism work to do. Maybe even stress hormones are so high in the morning that we're blunting our appetite too. So some things to think about there. But start with something small. Can we do something liquid? Like, can we make a smoothie or something that we can just sip instead of this whole hearty meal that we need to force down?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we start with some of those like gelatin gummies that are good for our gut and giving us some protein, just something simple because the appetite will come back. It just takes time. And where a lot of women get stuck is they are like, okay, I realized this wasn't working for me. Let me try something new. But then appetite's not there and they feel worse. And they're like, panic, we got to go back to what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we stay stuck. So I do like to speak to the fact that you don't always feel better when you transition off of the stress hormone thing first. It's like a rediscovering who you are without all those stress hormones. And like, who am I if I'm not rushing out to that 5 a.m. HIIT training class? Who am I if I'm not chugging a pot of coffee on my way to work? Who am I if I'm not pulling my hair out all day because I'm stressed? So I don't want to belittle that process. It's not as simple as being like, okay, I understand. I'm going to like nourish myself and slow down. There's a whole thing to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I interrupted you when you talked about eating breakfast within the first hour.
Yep.
I would assume, we don't have to spend a ton of time here, but probably wouldn't assume that you mean like a muffin and some Yoplait yogurt.
Yeah.
Maybe something more like eggs, turkey bacon, or Greek yogurt, or a smoothie like you talked about. Is there anything else that you would, point people to focus on when they do start to eat first thing in the morning?
Yeah, everything you mentioned was great because it was protein rich, and that's really our goal in the morning. Around 30 grams of protein is a good target for that breakfast. This is doing a lot for our adrenals. It's keeping our blood sugar steady for the rest of the day, and women tend to undereat protein. So if we can get that good bolus of that in the morning, we've started off strong. So I like to see things like, eggs, turkey bacon, sausage, whatever you've got on hand, Greek yogurt. Cottage cheese was like the MVP for me during the first trimester. I've like had it at every meal because I hated other proteins. So it's versatile. You could like mix it with your eggs. And then have some carbohydrate with that, whether that's fruit or oats, or if you're in your sourdough era, maybe it's a piece of toast, and then some good fats, which a lot of times are built into the protein, depending on what we have. If bacon's on the menu, or maybe we add avocado, cook things in butter. We want to see all three, but the focus is definitely on that protein first thing.
Cool. Anything else you want to add to that list of progesterone optimization?
Yeah, so the food piece is big for safety. We talked about the exercise stuff too, kind of in the midst of the whole like stress and burning the candle at the both ends. And, having to be honest about that too. Like we use exercise as an outlet for our stress, but we have to realize that it is a stressor too. And we have to earn that intensity through nourishment and rest. So if the nourishment and good sleep aren't there, then we have really no business doing anything crazy in the gym. But we slow it down. We do a lot of like weights and walking as the primary modalities at first, because we're getting the metabolism benefits of strength training and walking without taxing that nervous system.
Yeah, I love that.
And then I would just say the mineral piece would be an easy addition too, which I know we'll talk in a lot of detail about, but this is something that could be part of that morning, part of that breakfast. Having like some water with some salt and a squeeze of lime or lemon would be a great way to wake up digestion, start stimulating those digestive juices, and then make sure that we can actually hydrate and handle the stress of the day ahead.
Perfect
segue.
Useful segue here. Because I definitely want to give the proper stage to the minerals that deserve it. And we've talked about minerals here and there on different episodes, but kind of just in passing. We personally, Chase and I, know that minerals are really important. We've tried all sorts of minerals, the Quinton minerals, the trace minerals, the cell core minerals. And
and I think we all grew up with the general understanding that, if you're an athlete and you're sweating a lot, you need to replenish with Gatorade because there's electrolytes in there.
Yeah.
And then that kind of evolved into a little more of a mainstream education as it pertains to minerals and electrolytes, as like Liquid IV got quite popular, and now like brands like Element. And now, if you're a consumer of a general supplement company, even companies that we consume for just protein powder, so many of them have added like a mineral mix or like a orange drink or something that's loaded with electrolytes. But maybe if we could even just start from the top and like, what are minerals? Like 101, what are they? Why are they important? And what is potentially causing these deficiencies that we have in them?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about nutrition and we say micronutrients, we're talking about like the non-calorie components of our food, and that's vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. And I think vitamins are generally better known than minerals for whatever reason. I mean, they're generally needed in larger amounts, but minerals and electrolytes you'll sometimes hear used interchangeably. And electrolytes are just minerals with a charge, which they often exist as that in the body and in circulation. But minerals are cofactors for our enzymes. So to not get too deep into like biology for this, but enzymes make things happen in the body, whether that's turning food into energy, making our hormones, getting the thyroid on board, detoxifying things that we don't need. Those require enzymes, and those enzymes require minerals. So a good analogy that is not mine, but I use all the time, is that minerals are spark plugs for the body. So if we lack minerals, we lack that life force energy in our cells. And then we see everything else start to break down from there, which is why it's such a great thing to look at initially, because we could chase progesterone itself for a long time. But if we're just mineral deficient, we can't make it ourselves. We don't have the resources. And I think the reason why we're seeing more and more talk about minerals is that we've had the realization that our soil is quite depleted today versus even 50 or 100 years ago. And it's really difficult to get enough minerals through food alone. And I wish that wasn't the case. I would prefer to not have to be like drinking mineral beverages all the time and like tinctures everywhere, but it's difficult to meet our needs through food alone, paired with that like modern human high stress picture that we've talked about a lot. Stress uses minerals. So if we pair stress with a food supply that's low in minerals, we create a population that's deficient, and oftentimes we need some supplements to dig ourselves out of that.
That's such a great explanation, like the spark plugs, because I think everyone listening, us included, knows the feeling when you just are like, you feel like you're doing so many things right in your health and wellness, but you still feel so low, like you just can't muster the energy. And it's like, WTF. I'm doing so much, and that could be the problem, right? Like you're just trying to do too much, but obviously like getting these minerals balanced and optimized not only optimize, but can you talk about the relationship, like the ratios? And you don't have to get like super technical on each one of these different relationships, but just kind of generally, speaking to the relationship between minerals.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is like the thing to nerd out the most with with minerals is not just the individual levels, but how are these in relationship to one another? And with the human body, like nothing is in isolation. And if we super focus on one specific thing, we usually throw something else off. It's like this big, delicate web. And in the world of minerals, the balance between specific minerals tell us a lot about different body systems. So for like the HTMA test that you guys both did, we can learn about the state of the nervous system based on the relationship between calcium and phosphorus. Are you someone that's hanging out in that sympathetic fight or flight state most of the day? Or are we more parasympathetic, kind of lower energy throughout the day? We learn a lot about thyroid function at the cellular level through the relationship between calcium and potassium. And this is a really big one for our practice because thyroid issues run with the whole progesterone and infertility stuff. And we're able to capture clients who maybe have great looking blood work for their thyroid, or maybe they've been on thyroid medication for years and they're being told like, this looks perfect. And they're like, my hair is falling out and I'm gaining weight and I feel horrible. If we have an imbalance between calcium and potassium, we actually can't get that thyroid into the cell. So we're catching the issue at the cellular level versus just what's in circulation. And then we learn a lot about your adrenals. So what state of stress are we in? Are we in more of that like acute alarm phase? Are we in more of a resistance stage to stress? Or are we in that burnout zone where we've lost resilience? And that state of the nervous system is really dictating how quickly we're burning through those minerals in the first place. So we can start to put together a big picture of not just your mineral status, but like, what are you as a whole person doing right now? And how can we manipulate that with minerals?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Can you spend a little bit of time on, you mentioned the adrenals and thyroid and their function and importance for, optimization?
So the thyroid is the pacemaker for the body. It's really telling the cells how quickly to make energy, do their jobs. And when we think about those low progesterone symptoms, they really mirror low thyroid symptoms too. It's like the low energy, the low sex drive, usually some hair loss, just slow hair, skin, and nail growth and healing in general, usually some constipation. It's just like everything moving slow. And you'll see this with low basal body temps if you happen to track that too. And if we want to heal from something, if we want to optimize our health, if we want to support fertility, we have to have a thyroid that is conducting energy production at an appropriate rate. That's why we look at thyroid function for every client, because if we miss the mark there, we're really not going to see progress in other departments, because this is one of those fundamental energy production things. The cool thing about thyroid function is there's so many nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that influence that function. And there's just a lot we can do outside of the conventional medication realm. And then for our adrenals, because we've talked so much about stress and like that kind of cortisol addicted personality type, our adrenals sit on top of our kidneys and they spit out stress hormones for us in response to stressors. They also regulate mineral status in the blood too, particularly sodium. And so if we've got adrenals that are either over functioning, like high alert all the time, then we're burning through our minerals really quickly, because you can always think about stress as a mineral depleter. Or if we have adrenals that can't keep up with demand, which are usually adrenals that spent a lot of time in that really like high output state first, then we don't have that drive anymore. We might feel like we've lost that motivation or that zest for life. We might find that when stress happens, it just kicks our ass and we're like down for the count. So either end of that spectrum is a problem for optimal function. And again, minerals have a lot to do with that.
What is the window of time here? Like, is it possible for someone to go through a really stressful event, have high cortisol, but they feel like pretty okay because they're running on that high cortisol that's giving them that faux energy? And then so they get through this stressful event and maybe a couple months later notice like that stress is catching up. Can you talk about the time
Asking
frame?
for a friend.
Yeah. How long do I have?
Can you talk about that? Like it might not be happening like in real time down to the minute, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And obviously the timeline will vary a bit from person to person. And a lot of that timeline variance depends on how minerally replete you were. So if you had great mineral stores, we can handle that mineral change from stress better. And we're going to have a longer lag time between big stress and us feeling it because we can buffer stress with minerals. But if we went into this pretty depleted, which is like most of us listening, because we're modern humans just trying to get enough minerals from our food, we can feel that in, weeks, maybe a couple of months. And it's not an instant change because we never bring our minerals to zero in the body. This is why you really never catch mineral problems in blood work because this is so tightly regulated. You only see mineral problems in blood work when we are in like dire health. We can see mineral issues in tissues faster than that, but it can take some time before we actually deplete the stores that we had and actually feel those symptoms. So I'd say anywhere from like a couple weeks to 3 months would be pretty typical for that lag time. And it is important to know it's not instant because you might go through something stressful and you're like, I feel awesome. I'm fine. I must not need to look at this.
Yeah, no, we've talked about that, and I've had, a stressful career to say the least, for most of my adult life. And I've always had this lag when it comes to exhaustion and fatigue. And, when we got divorced and went through sort of like the toughest part in my personal life, and it was compounded by work stress, I didn't have my adrenal exhaustion until, 2 years later. And even now we've been talking, the last few months have been what seems like this, new wave of adrenal fatigue for me. And I had a very stressful season of work last year, and I'm out of it and seemingly like have no reason to be stressed out right now. Just life's pretty damn good. But my symptoms are indicative of, some of these more adrenal fatigue type environments. And so I think it's important to have that at least awareness, because I definitely like have this feeling, especially right now, WTF, like I don't have a reason to not sleep. Why am I not sleeping? But having just a little bit more patience is a healthy psychology as I approach all of this.
It's hard though. Like we want to fix it immediately and we
Right.
want to blame current symptoms on current practices. And that's not the case. And I do often tell our clients that if we are really depleted in minerals or we've had a lot of stress, it's not unreasonable to expect 6 to 12 months of working really hard on minerals to get that level back up because your stress doesn't stop while you're working on it.
Yeah.
As much as that would be great. Realistic timeline expectations are big.
Yeah. Patience.
I'd love to get into, like, let's say we're on, minerals are a pyramid and we've got kind of the all stars at the top. What would you say are the top minerals to focus on, pay attention to, and then what do they essentially, regulate in the body?
Yeah, so there are 4 that we would start with. And so if you happen to do HTMA testing with somebody, you'll see that they're the first 4 to show up on the test. And they're considered, foundational or tier 1 minerals because what's happening with those really influence all the rest of the trace minerals. So we could spin our wheels with like really specific trace minerals and not make progress if we don't work on these first. So the 4 are calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So calcium and magnesium tend to be more soothing and sedating. So they might help us get into that parasympathetic rest and digest. They'll help us have more nervous system flexibility so we can turn that stress off after it happens. They're involved in like insulin production and release too. So there's a big blood sugar connection as well. And we are going to feel that on the high and low end. So particularly with calcium, when that is too high, we're going to start to struggle to use our thyroid hormone really well. So we might feel sluggish, hypothyroid type symptoms. If it's too low, we're like, my brain will literally not chill. I cannot sleep at night. I feel really revved up. Like it doesn't make sense for the stress in my life, but I feel like I can't get my nervous system out of this state. So it's a Goldilocks with all of these. And then magnesium, I think your audience is probably most familiar with because magnesium does get the airtime it deserves. It does like infinite things in the body essentially. And it's one of the first things that we lose in response to stress. So again, if we've got that stress picture, we probably have some magnesium support that we need. And then sodium and potassium are more energizing. So they're kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. They're more stimulating. They help keep things in solution in the body. They're solvents. They're a big part of how we get nutrients and hormones into the cells and how well those cells actually work. So when those are low, we tend to feel low energy and depleted, more burnt out. When they're high, which on an HTMA is a little different than how we'd look at blood work, but it typically indicates a loss. So it's something that happens in response to stress. We can feel like the anxiousness that we would with an acute stress response. Heart palpitations are really common with sodium and potassium abnormalities. I wish I could have tested my minerals back at the peak of like my dysregulation of running marathons, recently coming off birth control, grad school work, and like not eating enough, because it was probably insane. I was having so many heart palpitations that I was seeing cardiologists just convinced something was wrong. And I bet I just had no potassium because I was drinking Gatorade, which has not enough in it.
No.
Anyways, not to digress, but those are our foundational minerals that we'd start with.
We've mentioned it a few times, the HTMA, which is hair tissue mineral analysis, if anyone's not aware. And that's literally, we cut our own hair and sent it to a lab that Kaely set up for us, sent us the forms and everything. And they're able to look at the hair and what minerals are in like being excreted or stored. Is that correct? And then so if you're seeing too low, obviously that's, not great. But then too high, what you're saying is like it can be like, can you explain that a little bit? Like why too high would be a problem as well?
Yeah, this is one of the weirdest things about HTMAs if you're used to looking at other labs. So we're looking at tissue information, which is different than blood work. And we're looking at about a 3-month picture versus just a single day. And so we're able to learn about what's happening in the cell and what's happening in tissues, which is a cool opportunity to learn about like your biology. So in response to stress, certain minerals actually leave the cell. So they leave the cell, they increase in the blood, and then can be picked up more by the hair follicle. So we'll actually see things like potassium and magnesium really high on an HTMA in somebody that actually has a great need for those things because we've lost them due to stress, or we've lost them because we didn't have the synergistic minerals to hold on to it. And then with sodium, we talked about the adrenal glands making stress hormones. They also make something called aldosterone that regulates sodium. And so our initial alarm to stress actually increases sodium retention. So we'll see a higher sodium on an HTMA. So a high HTMA mineral level doesn't necessarily mean that you've been like ODing on potassium or magnesium. It's telling us a stress signature about the last 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
I can't remember if I asked you this last week when we talked, but what if, you get your HTMA back and you just go drink 7 elements a day? And, how's that going to show up on the test if you just like, all right, I'm just going to bathe in minerals?
Yeah. So it really depends on your physiology and your stress. If you are a high stress individual, you might actually feel great. I don't know about 7 of those, but we'd see. And you'd have to do that prolonged over, our 3-month kind of test window before we'd see a big change in your HTMA. And it could do a number of things. It could show that we're increasing our sodium because our intake has been higher, or it could actually reduce tissue sodium because now we don't have the adrenals saying, here's the aldosterone, hang on to this. We can actually calm the stress response by getting more sodium and working on the adrenals that way. It's almost like a reverse way of calming down stress hormones. So a lot of our like high achieving entrepreneurs are shocked by how much sodium they actually need and how much better they feel stress wise. And then their sodium improves on an HTMA. And that's one of the other like big unlearnings from the last few decades is that salt is not the enemy.
Yeah.
I remember just being stunned by that, thinking if I could have told my like dietitian student self how much sodium I recommend these days, I would have never believed it.
Yeah. Well, that's a question that I have is like, how do you tell if you are taking too much? And obviously, we've worked with you and you've given us like, prescribed dosages essentially for optimizing these minerals. But even in the last week, I've taken some electrolyte powders or whatever, and then I've gotten like wild stomach cramps. And so is that like what is that indicative of? Am I probably overdoing it to some degree, which is a theme for me?
We got the pickleball mix that you recommended, which I'm loving, and I feel great. And then the electrolyte, I think it's like a berry flavor, just general electrolyte mix that also, so we have one of each per day.
But I've like, even, prior to this in the past, where I've been like, oh, magnesium, so good, I'm going to load up on magnesium. And then I've had like chronic diarrhea for like 2 days or whatever.
Yeah, it can totally happen. Yeah, you probably did too much too soon. It may not be too much for you overall, but when we're starting from a depleted state or a high need state, sometimes if we go too fast, we can actually feel worse. And most of our minerals are going to influence water being pulled into the intestines as well, particularly things like sodium and magnesium. And so we can have loose stools as a result of pushing that too hard or too fast. So some things to think about would be, could I spread this out over the day versus like
chugging it in the morning?
Yes, like chugging it.
Yeah.
Could I do half the dose for the next couple of days and just see how I feel? And then am I getting good representation of magnesium, sodium, and potassium versus just one of them? Because they definitely work in tandem. So the bowel symptoms is a big clue that maybe we need to slow it down. Like water retention, puffiness. Have you had that with minerals, or do you generally feel like it gets better?
The last week I have been bloated and puffy.
Okay. So that's telling us that we probably need to look at the amount of sodium and amount of potassium and tweak that a little bit.
Okay.
And the like annoying and good thing about mineral work is that it does take a little bit of trial and error. You got to like feel how this feels in your body and make some tweaks there too. But typically if we're having some fluid retention, it's because we didn't get enough potassium with that sodium. And then your retest of an HTMA, should you do that down the road, will actually give us even more insight than the first, because we're just looking at a baseline and we also know how much stress can influence the way that picture looks. We might see a totally different picture a couple months from now, and it can help us get more specific about doses for you. But the closer you can get to paying attention to that feedback, the better you can titrate this yourself. But you definitely don't need to like suffer through some symptoms. I would slow it down or play with those ratios.
Cool. Yeah. Maybe spreading it out in the day.
Yeah.
And this is great because it's, we both did a session with you and we both got the same products and we're eating a lot of the same foods, but obviously we have very different needs. So this is perfectly highlighting why it's so important to like work with someone who knows what the fuck they're doing, because you've looked at probably thousands of HTMA tests, and this would be really, really difficult for someone to just order and then try and interpret it on their own. Like I was completely lost. I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, but like I was lost looking at what was going on. Like it requires a trained eye to really optimize this. And on that note of individuality and individual needs, something that I hadn't heard of before doing this HTMA test with you was the metabolic type. And I would love to just spend a minute, if somebody does do the HTMA test with someone else or yourself, you spoke to that metabolic type right on the front end of going through our results. And so I think that would be beneficial for our listeners if you could run through.
Yeah, I think the eye like naturally goes there because we're seeing like metabolism and we're being typed by the report.
Yeah.
And it's like fast or slow, which just feels aggressive from a test that doesn't know you. So when you run an HTMA, you get a metabolic type, which is based on a couple of those mineral relationships that we discussed. And it will either be fast or slow, and then there'll be numbers 1 through 4 next to the fast or slow. And so there really isn't like a gold standard that we're looking for here. And that's an important thing about HTMAs either. This is just feedback from 3 months. This isn't like we got an A+ on this HTMA. It's just information about you. And so with those metabolic types, it doesn't necessarily equate to like slow metabolism, fast metabolism in the sense of like maintaining body composition goals and things that you desire, but it does speak to energy production. So slow metabolic type tends to be more parasympathetic, lower energy. Fast metabolic type tends to be more sympathetic, fight or flight, fast energy production. And with fast energy production comes high mineral utilization, and eventually could be depleted and you find yourself on the other end of the spectrum. And then the numbers tell us, are the body systems being assessed here in sync or out of sync? Meaning, do we have our nervous system and metabolism, adrenals and thyroid all running at the same pace? Or do we have some fast and some slow, which would be more out of sync? So the fast one and slow one are like middle of the road, meaning all fast or all slow. So if we had to pick things that we would prefer, slow one and fast one is what I would choose, because we just like to see body systems kind of all being on the same pace. As we get farther from that midline out to the 4s, fast 4 and slow 4, we have more out of sync or dysregulation, where we might have, 1 foot on the gas and 1 foot on the brake.
Yeah, that's really, really good information. So it's like, you could think of like the 1 being a slight deviation from what homeostasis might look like in the body. And then it gets further and further out deviated as far as the body systems working in coordination and balance and homeostasis. So does that, if you're say a fast 4 or slow 4, does that generally, in your experience, take a little longer to normalize?
Absolutely, especially fast 4. You'll sometimes hear that called 4 lows pattern, and it is usually the depletion stage of the fast metabolic type. So again, we're thinking foot on the gas, we're using resources. Those resources have a limit unless this has been on our radar. So at some point we're going to deplete them. So in a fast 4, you typically see those 4 foundational minerals with really tiny bars. And we see this fairly frequently in practice because high stress, whether that's from working on your health stuff for a long time, maybe you've been sick for years or decades, you've been on the merry-go-round of gut protocols and detoxes and all of that, or you just have a lot of life stressors or very little mineral input, that fast 4 type shows up pretty frequently, and it will take longer to replete. So when we see that, we generally know we've got a client that's probably going to take a little bit longer. And we set that expectation in the beginning too, of that good 6 to 12 months of repletion. That doesn't mean we shouldn't expect to feel better sooner than that, but for complete resolution of things, we're looking at a longer timeline.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And I just love, learning new things like this, and it's just so helpful because it's just a lot of information when you get a bunch of these tests, and I really, really enjoyed learning about that.
How much does this test cost for anybody?
Yeah, it's $70, which is
That
amazing.
is in the scope of testing, and in the world of, I'm talking thousands of dollars to try to figure yourself out. Not only is this affordable, it's also in the order of operations so far upstream. It should be such a priority. It's something that I'm sort of kicking myself for not having done earlier after having spent so much money on blood work. But also I've been this close so many times to hormone therapies, or just the suite of peptide protocols that are out there, because so many of the people that I look up to in the male optimization exercise space, you never know until they come out, but they're, optimized through hormone therapies or peptides. And I've always wondered, and this is a great question for you, if you were to not address minerals or micronutrients, but rather get better, using air quotes, through peptides and hormones and, biohacking gadgets, but really never address these, what happens? What does this actually look like? It seems like it would mask an underlying problem that may manifest even into something worse later, but I would be curious.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's in line with what we said about birth control too. You might feel better, you might get some symptom improvement, but we didn't look at why there was an issue in the first place. And so that's not going to go away. And typically it just gets worse over time, especially because when we bring in hormones or things that can be, stimulating energy production in different ways, now we're even using nutrients faster. So just thinking about, have we troubleshooted all the potential reasons why I'm having problems with production? And if we haven't yet, then it feels irresponsible to jump to something that would just mask it.
Yeah. And expensive. And I think this is all in synchronicity for a reason, honestly, the economics of it, as well as the prioritization of it.
Right.
With somebody like myself who takes a million supplements and has for a long time, how important is it to understand the full scope of the ingredients that are going into the supplements that you're using, or, what they actually have from a byproduct standpoint? For instance, if one of your supplements or adaptogenic herbs that you're taking is suppressing potassium and you don't even know it. So how important is that sort of intake process prior to making decisions with regards to your minerals?
Yeah, it's super important. And I think because we live in a time where we have so much access to information and we're, influenced by other products, we can quickly be taking a ton of stuff. and it gets expensive for sure. And we just want to make sure it's not undercutting what your primary goals are. So, should you embark on mineral testing and digging into this, pulling up like everything that you take and looking over those ingredient lists with a trained eye is going to be really important, because sometimes we've got an ingredient in there that's messing with a specific mineral, or maybe it's competing with one that we're trying to increase. There's a lot of like synergist and antagonistic relationships among nutrients. So sometimes even our best intentioned supplement is actually like keeping us where we are. And there's nothing worse than spending money and like religiously taking something and it's actually not helping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, yeah. I know. I think about all the supplements that we've spent money on and taken in the past. And it's fun. It's fun to try new supplements, especially, brands are sending you stuff and it's fun, but it's like, is this actually supportive of my goal? Which both of our goal right now is maximizing and optimizing fertility. And so it's like, I think we overcomplicate it sometimes, especially those of us who like health and wellness is like a hobby, it's like, it's fun and it's exciting. It's a
hobby, but I've also realized like, if you don't know what you're doing, it's kind of a dangerous hobby.
It's an expensive hobby.
It's an expensive hobby. It's a dangerous hobby. You fuck up. And I've been just reflecting back on the years that I was doing like keto or intermittent fasting or like wild fasting protocols, and I'm like, there were seasons in my life where I wouldn't have touched a banana because of the sugar. And now I'm looking at, deficient potassium levels, like, Jesus, what was I thinking?
Banana.
There was no warning label on the keto protocol from influencer XYZ.
Yeah.
And I just think that those are, when you're in your 20s, especially, I so desperately wanted to be like this really cool entrepreneur, optimized biohacking bro, and without having the full scope of, disclaimers when it comes to the protocols that I was using, the supplements that I was taking, I just wasn't in a position to be able to properly evaluate, what the downstream negative side effects of some of these things could have been, even if they resulted in the aesthetic or the cognitive benefit or whatever else I was doing the modality for at that particular time. And so like, man, I really can't emphasize how important, one, just the education of this conversation and this protocol for your own, wellness journey really is. But also just like, it's actually low-hanging fruit in my opinion. This doesn't take a big lift. The results come back pretty quickly. Albeit you use a, highly experienced professional like yourself, Kaely, to guide and handhold one through the process of interpreting these results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with like the economics of it. And even just, it feels like there's been a pendulum swing in the wellness community where we're like, wait, why did we make things so ridiculous?
Yeah.
Like it got real complicated. And if we feel that way in this space, I just can really empathize with like the clients that we serve that are like, oh my God, like I have to do this 6-hour morning routine. I want to be healthy. So it feels good. Like moving to minerals as being like a foundational thing we do with all clients felt very good to me because it is so simple. In fact, it's almost like too simple sometimes, and people don't latch on to how important it is because this is just like boring recommendations compared to some cool fancy protocols. But yeah, it's inexpensive, it's accessible, it is absolutely the root cause. We're talking about the way our cells work, and you got to walk before you can run. And if fancy biohacking stuff is your jam, amazing. Just want to make sure that you feel good while you do it.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, so we talked about a few sort of macro minerals, these big players, these major, top of the pyramid. And I want to talk about some of the other ones, but I think it would be helpful. We can't leave this conversation without talking about iron. And I think some of these other minerals will kind of play into this conversation. But I literally last year learned about the iron recycling system in the body. And I was like, what? How have I never learned about this? This is crazy. As someone who had low iron and like bruised really easily, I was like, oh, cool. I'll just take an iron supplement. Well, that's not great to do, by the way. So let's talk about iron. What is the iron recycling system, and why should we maybe think twice about taking an iron supplement or supplements with added iron?
Yeah. I had the same experience with this too. You would think that the iron recycling system would have been a part of like nutrition curriculum because this is pretty foundational. It wasn't for me. Maybe it is now. And I have to credit, Morley Robbins and his work and kind of sifting through decades of research to pull information that we've known for a long time, just hasn't been very mainstream. And so the body has a really efficient recycling program for iron because it is so important. Like this is how we make good red blood cells that carry oxygen around the body. We do not feel or function well without iron. So the body is really efficient at recycling it. And with that recycling system working well, if we have all the components in place, we really only need, 1 or 2 milligrams of iron each day to come in through food or supplements. And if you've ever looked at like iron content of food, you know how very easy it would be to get 1 or 2 milligrams.
It's like 3 bites of steak.
Yes, like lick a steak and you've probably accomplished this. Like it's not much.
Yeah.
And the reason why I was ever even digging into his work is that I was truly perplexed by how prevalent iron deficiency anemia is when the food supply is abundant in iron. Like all our processed food is fortified with iron, like ridiculous amounts. Birth control is fortified with iron. And it's like, if we're getting more iron than we ever have as a species, why are we still seeing so much iron deficiency? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I had the same experience as you, Mimi, like as a high school athlete, fatigue, bruising often. And they're like, oh yeah, you're an athlete. You just like need to take iron. And then nothing ever got better.
My poop just turned black.
Yes. You're just like wondering if you have internal bleeding, but it's fine. So the bigger picture is not, is there a deficiency of iron? It is, can we access the iron that we inevitably have? And in the absence of like a major trauma where we had big blood loss, there really should not be a deficient state of iron because we just don't need much if that's working well. And so that iron recycling system, if not working well, means that iron gets stuck where it doesn't belong. It's stuck in the tissues, it's stuck in immune cells, it's stuck in the gut, where it can cause a lot of inflammation, feed pathogens, contribute to autoimmune disease, and it's not available for red blood cell production. So we have blood work that looks like anemia, symptoms that look like anemia, but the problem isn't lack of iron, it's lack of the nutrients that move it. So the nutrients that move it largely are copper, which is another big mineral on that HTMA, and vitamin A in the retinol form specifically, so not beta carotene. If we have good copper and vitamin A status, the iron recycling system moves well, and then we can keep iron where it belongs in the blood and in motion and not literally rusting inside tissues, organs, and cells.
I have to imagine that contributes to like premature aging as well.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting area of looking at it. But if we look at iron exposed to oxygen in nature and we see rust, I mean, that's what's happening internally too.
So you mentioned vitamin A and the ready to use version of vitamin A. So maybe not so much like piling carrots into your nutritional diet plan or whatever. That carrots are fine, but like if we're really optimizing vitamin A to optimize also our use of iron, what are some sources that you recommend of vitamin A and copper?
So like you mentioned, we want that usable form of vitamin A, which is retinol. And we don't convert beta carotene, like the orange fruits and vegetable source of vitamin A, over to retinol very efficiently. Some people that is like as low as 30%. It's very low. And for people that are interested in conceiving, vitamin A is a huge fertility nutrient. And I think the recent data was that 1.5% of infants in the US are retinol sufficient. So like less than 2%, which is crazy. It's crazy. So retinol sources are primarily animal foods, or I should say exclusively animal products if we're looking for retinol. Plants give us beta carotene, animals give us retinol. So we'd be looking at like grass-fed steaks. We'd be looking at liver if you're down to eat it. That's like one of the highest retinol sources that we have. Raw milk is a high retinol source. Grass-fed butter, like pastured egg yolks, things like that would be great retinol sources. There's a lot of copper overlap in some of those foods too, which is of course nature, like knowing exactly what it's doing. So liver being a great copper and vitamin A source. We can find this copper also in like oysters. We can find it in chlorophyll. We can find it in bee pollen. We can find it in cacao. So there's a lot of great food sources that can work together with vitamin A and copper, or even provide both. And one of my main complaints about most prenatals is that the vitamin A is not retinol form. It's usually, the cheaper ones are just beta carotene. The nicer ones are a split between beta carotene and then retinol palmitate, which is still a lab made retinol, which is why we want to see some dietary representation of retinol for like preconception.
If you don't want to call out specific brands, that's totally fine. But when I was working with you, we were working with you, you actually made the recommendation for me to switch my prenatal, which I was using what I thought to be, I think it is a really high quality
For sure.
prenatal, but based on my results, you were saying like, yeah, you probably want to take out any supplements that are adding iron because you just don't need it right now. And I did have iron in my prenatal. I'm not going to say the name because I think that it can be fine for someone else.
Absolutely.
But what are some brands of prenatals that you recommend to your clients or use yourself?
Yeah, so we're looking for, the form of vitamin A, the form of the B vitamins, and then no iron. I don't like to see iron in a prenatal unless you're somebody that we know like actually needs it, which it does happen. It's just a lot less prevalent than we're led to believe. So I really like Fullwell's prenatal formulation. Needed makes a good prenatal, and Seeking Health does too. So those are the three that we recommend the most often that meet those criteria. We have quite a few clients that will choose to DIY their prenatal rather than taking one that's pre-formulated, just so that they have a little bit more control over the form and dose of certain nutrients.
That makes sense.
That's what I'm doing personally, but I will say it's tedious and it's like a lot of individual things. So it's not necessarily the easier option, but we do, help clients with either side of that.
Cool. Yeah, I switched to the Needed, which I have heard about from probably on 10 different podcasts. And I had from people that I respect and really admire. And so it was an easy switch for me, and I'm not affiliated with them at all. But one thing I do like about Needed, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this version of prenatal. They gave you two different options. They gave you a capsule option, which I just don't love taking capsules if I don't have to. So the other option was a powder that you just add to a smoothie or milk or yogurt or something like that. And I will say, have you tried the powder version?
I haven't, but I'm intrigued by that as well because I also get like capsule fatigue.
Yeah. And that's the reason why I didn't go with Fullwell, was because it was 8 capsules.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I don't want to take 8 more capsules a day. So I decided to try Needed. And it's just 2 little scoops of this powder. It's probably like, I don't know, a tablespoon total of powder that I just add to my Greek yogurt in the morning. And it tastes like cake batter, which I don't know if I should be like, it tastes really good. Like I had Chase try it too.
It tastes good.
It does taste really good. It's like vanilla flavored, amazing flavor. So
that's great.
There's my testimonial. I've only been taking it for about a week, but it seems to be going really well. Awesome. The only reason I could see this being like inconvenient is if you were on the go, or if you didn't have something to mix it in, quickly. I could see how someone wouldn't want to do that every day. Or like if you're traveling, like when we're traveling to Greece for a month, it might be harder for me to get my prenatal, mixed in milk or a smoothie or something. So there's that. But so far, I really like the option. And I think it could be easier for women who struggle taking capsules or have like a really strong gag reflex.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice add-on that they did to have that option. Because I even think about, first trimester with just the morning sickness and things that can happen, that it might be easier to have a powder versus capsules. It's cool.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you your go-to foods. One of the things I loved about the follow-up to our testing and our conversation with you is that the protocol you outlined was so heavily dominant through just like foods, whole foods, whole clean foods. And one, that's what we usually advocate for. So I love that alignment. But 2, like supplements can get expensive, and I'm sure you can patch together your needs after getting your results through, a host of different supplements. But, why not consume them through foods? And so for you, what are some like no-brainer foods that you keep around, knowing that it's beneficial for your, overall mineral portfolio? And obviously you mentioned bananas, and that's pretty indoctrinated to all of us that bananas have potassium, but like what else would you recommend people just have on hand?
Yeah, fruit in general is a great mineral powerhouse. I'm like having intense orange cravings for some reason in pregnancy, so I'm just rolling with that. So like oranges are stocked here all the time, and I like panic if we run out. But fruit, it would be a great thing, whether it's fresh or frozen. This can be even more economical with the frozen options, but it's a great way to get some minerals, particularly potassium, but there's some other trace minerals in there too. We're big into raw milk because we've got a great source of it here, and that is not only mineral rich, but also retinol rich. So that's something that's top of mind. And it's also like carbs, proteins, and fats together. It's nourishing, so we can do a lot with that. I don't love it, but I do eat it because I care about the nutrients. I eat, some grass-fed liver. I try to do that once a week. That is my goal. My husband happens to love it. I am not there yet, but I'm trying. And then like bone broth is another great like mineral powerhouse. It's honestly pretty similar to those higher sodium electrolyte powders. And you get quite a bit of sodium from bone broth amongst others. So it's a nice like high protein snack. You're getting a lot of minerals from it. I'm trying to think what else I keep on hand. Eat a lot of eggs. And then, I don't eat a ton of raw vegetables because I just don't find that serves my digestion well. But, cooked leafy greens are great for minerals as well. And then one last thing I'll add, actually, because this is a great one that's super cost effective, is I'm into like nettle tea and nettle infusion. So it's a herb, and it is so low cost and so high mineral, and it tastes like kind of a mild green tea. So I make a big batch of that for the start of the week and keep it in the fridge and sip it like iced tea. And it's like a very inexpensive mineral mocktail.
Cool. I want to try that.
So I know they have nettle teas like in a tea bag, or you could probably make it yourself if you buy the loose leaf, whatever. So in your opinion, like using the tea bags is fine?
Yeah, okay. I would just make a big batch, so multiple tea bags, and steep it for a really long time. Like I usually just buy it like bulk loose, and then I'll let it steep for like 6 or 8 hours. It just sits on the counter for the day, and then I'll strain it and put it in the fridge. That would be especially helpful for you, Chase, because it's a great calcium source too.
Okay, great.
It's absolutely applicable for you too, Mimi. But whenever somebody needs some calcium support, that's a nice go-to.
Okay, cool. I might DM you on the side here to get your exact recipe, because I would love that. I used to do that with raspberry leaf tea.
Yeah.
I would make sun tea, put it on the deck and have the sun hit it for at least 12 hours or whatever, and then sip on it. And I don't know why I got away from that. It was really nice just to have a big jar of something, and it really helped with cramping and everything with my cycle. But now I am one of those people. I thank God that my period comes and goes, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, okay, it's here now. Yeah. I've never been one to have like intense, crazy bleeds or like really intense. You get cramps here and there. You kind of have like low energy the first day, but other than that, it's pretty easy. So I think that's why I got away from using that tea, but I think nettle, I think we can try that out for sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, so we have some food recommendations that would be good for probably anyone and everyone, no matter what their HTMA might look like. Yep. Obviously, I hope we've made it very clear to the listener how valuable it is to work with someone like Kaely. And there are a lot of practitioners that do what you do, maybe not in the exact same way, but it's not that everyone has to work with you. But I think if people can, speaking from personal experience, it's just been really nice to work with somebody who knows what they're talking about and can make real life recommendations. So it's really important to work with someone. But what are some other tips as far as like supplements and things for, I'm guessing that there are some general recommendations you can make for people if they are wanting to supplement. Like we got those pickleball mixes and electrolyte mixes. Are there ones that you basically, could recommend for pretty much anyone?
Yeah. So the ones you mentioned are from Jigsaw Health. They make a couple of nice products. I love their adrenal cocktail, because you're not having to DIY that. And then the pickleball one is pretty unique because it's super high in potassium. It's hard to find products that are that high in potassium. There's only one other one. It's called Ravy. that I've been able to find that hits that like 800 milligrams in a serving. So we recommend, pickleball, we recommend Ravy. Just having a good quality salt on hand is a big mineral win too. So meaning unrefined, ideally just evaporated so that we didn't chemically extract all the trace minerals from it. So things like Redmond real salt, Celtic sea salt, Crucial 4 makes a good salt. There are plenty of others. Like I like to look at the salt in the grocery store and find some like unique salts from different places. But adding like a pinch of that to your water is a great start with minerals. You could take something like a pickleball cocktail, which is really high potassium, add a little bit of salt to that, and now it's a bit more balanced between sodium and potassium. Magnesium is another easy supplement for a lot of people. And there's a lot of ways to do this. You can do like a transdermal lotion spray or Epsom salt soak if you're like, I cannot with another supplement, or you can do capsules or powders with magnesium as well.
Yeah, I got some magnesium lotion that I've been putting on my legs and feet at night before bed. And I've also upped my oral magnesium a little bit. And I think that is definitely helping like my digestion and keeping things moving along. I've only been doing it for a week, but all the recommendations that you gave us have been really, really helpful for me. You also recommended coconut water.
Oh, yeah.
Using coconut water, because me specifically, my potassium was pretty low. That was kind of the takeaway from our session with you that I was like, okay, I really need to focus on potassium. And it lined up with my symptoms because I was like hitting 3 p.m. and I was just like low fatigue, energy, brain fog, like feeling like my mind is moving through mud. And I can already notice a difference.
Awesome.
So that's great. But the coconut water this is kind of a selfish question. If I'm mixing the coconut water with the electrolyte or the jigsaw pickleball mix, is that like, would that be too much if I'm using like, say, 4 ounces of coconut water?
It really depends on how you feel with it. Now having seen your potassium and how low it is, like you have such a high target for potassium in the day that's probably just going to help you get there. As long as you're not having any GI upset from that all at once, then I would continue with it. And coconut water, I should have mentioned with like the staples to keep on hand. Again, really great potassium source. And we oftentimes will have clients mix that with their electrolyte powders just to bump the potassium up more. But you're just looking to make sure that you do feel energized and this was positive, not like it's messing with digestion because we got a bit of a potassium bomb coming in there.
Yeah, so far it's been fine. Sometimes I mix, with the electrolyte mixed from Jigsaw, I mix like a little orange juice in there or a little orange juice in it's already orange flavored, the pickleball one. So I haven't been doing that, but so far I'm feeling great on it. And so this is something that I could do just year round, right? Like this is the new normal.
Yes.
Which I can totally do. Are there specific times in our life where we need to be even more dialed in on minerals than just the average day-to-day laissez-faire, mineral element tea, like taking a packet of element every day? Great. Are there other times where we might want to focus more?
Yeah, any high stress season. So if you happen to like have some foresight that work's going to be crazy or a new project coming up, or something happens and we're thrust into that stressful season, we generally need more mineral support in that time frame. And so I would be looking at sodium, potassium, and magnesium increased in that season. And then pregnancy is a huge time of mineral need. So your mineral needs change a little bit trimester to trimester. And then the estimate is that you pass on 10% of your mineral stores to each baby. So a big download of minerals to grow them and set them up for success. And then if you breastfeed, there's a huge mineral demand on that too. It's why you can actually see like bone density and tooth changes in moms that are breastfeeding. You can actually see them get like almost see-through, which I know I'm preaching to the choir with your background. So big mineral needs during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then if you plan to have more than one baby, that period of time between the first and second or second and third is a really crucial period to replete those minerals. So you come into the next pregnancy with topped off stores because the nature is designed that baby's going to get what baby needs, even if it has to extract from mom, meaning like pulling from bones and teeth. So we just want to set you up for success with that.
Yeah, that's great. Oh my
Amazing.
gosh. So much
So
good
good.
information.
Yeah.
I so enjoy talking to you and learning from you. And I just really appreciate your very balanced approach. Your energy is great. Just what you want
Thank you.
from someone who's educating you, a practitioner. Like
Yeah.
you should, this is for everyone out there listening. When you talk to a health coach, practitioner, whoever you're working with, you should feel more calm on the other side of the conversation than more stressed, right? No matter what your labs, no matter what your results look like, you should be getting that calm, balanced, peaceful feeling from your practitioner. And I definitely feel that from you.
And
I really
empowered,
appreciate
right?
it.
Like
Yeah.
like empowered and educated, because there's nothing more frustrating than being in front of someone who knows way more than you and then leaving feeling even more stupid
Yeah. Yeah.
because they were not able to break it into bite-sized pieces for you. And so much gratitude for your superpower there.
Thank you guys. It means a lot. And thanks for being down to experiment and run some labs.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love it. I mean, it's perfect. It's perfect timing, everything that's going on with us and our
Yeah.
stage of life. I know there's people listening right now that are like, okay, I need to work with this girl. I want to work with this girl. How can people learn more about you, your practice, and possibly work with you?
Yeah, so you can find me the most on Instagram. Really only the bandwidth for like one social media platform at this season of my life.
Yeah.
Same girl,
It's
same.
it's at Kaely RD, like Mimi shared earlier, and you'll find a lot of free educational resources there. We've got a lot of free stuff, like even in the link in my bio too. And then you'll find info about the different ways my team and I can support you, kind of in different tiers there.
Awesome. Yeah, we will, of course, have all of those links in the show notes, you guys. And even if you don't decide, even if you don't feel like you need to work with someone like Kaely or Kaely and specifically, definitely just follow her Instagram. She has a wonderful Instagram. It's like the shit I've been into lately.
Yeah.
It's deep diving your stuff.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your light and your wisdom with us and our listeners. And I know it landed, I know it resonated, and I'm just so grateful for your work.
Oh, grateful for this opportunity. Thank you guys.
Thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out with us. Check the show notes for all of the links, and we will talk to you next time. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.